Koka sunarai sunarayanti. 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 Koka sunarai sunarayanti.
Hello, hi, welcome to this new episode of the Mango TV podcast. Today I have my friend Daniel Pinchbeck back for the third time, and I will let him introduce himself this time.
Okay, well, as you know, as Giancarlo knows, I'm the author of a number of books. Breaking Open the Head, which came out in 2002, which helped to reintroduce psychedelics to the modern Western society when it was still very repressed. Then in 2006, I released 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, which we've now republished as Quetzalcoatl Returns with an audiobook. That book was a bestseller. Then I was featured in Rolling Stone. I was on the Colbert Report. Then I perhaps, unfortunately, tried to start a company and a nonprofit. We had a reality sandwich, which I'm not involved with anymore, a web magazine, the Evolver Network, where we had a social network, but also a network of local community groups. And I actually started that with Ken Jordan, who recently passed away on maybe COVID complications. So then I made this film with Giancarlo, 2012, Time for Change, directed by João Amorim. And what else did I do? I wrote a book called How Soon Is Now in 2016. That was attempting to look at the path to dealing with the ecological catastrophe that we're facing through a systemic redesign of human society, incorporating a esoteric framework or like a sort of analytic idealist paradigm, which I still feel, and I'm still very much involved with trying to propagate that as a great option for us. And right now I have a newsletter, which is like my focus, danielpinchbeck.substack.com. It's called Liminal News. I also offer courses, and I have different products, including audiobooks and so on, at liminal.news if you want to book up with my ideas and my work.
There was that book that I like. It was a little booklet, like Notes from the Edge Time.
That was a long time ago. Yeah, that was a book but there's a number of other little books. Notes from the Edge Times was one.
It was very biographical, I remember.
That was like essays, but I've also got a book called Afterlife. Actually, I just published a collection of essays called The World You See is the Myth You Are In from the last couple of years of the newsletter.
Yeah. I mean, Daniel was a real visionary. He was the first one who really understood the potential of psychedelic for not just personal growth and medical, but also for a potential change of paradigm, which what I would like to focus on today. So, Daniel, just for people that are not familiar, when we say that our current paradigm is scientific materialism, people get confused. They think that they confuse materialism with capitalism, and scientific materialism means that our institution, our academia, in terms of getting funding, getting peer review, they believe that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain. So there is no really scientific research around this idea of cosmic consciousness, or this idea that there are life after death, paranormal phenomenon. But this is changing. This is changing now, right? Why not, just for the people who are new to this topic, can you take us a little bit towards this scientific materialism, where it comes from? Is a Newtonian Cartesian, this idea of a gigantic clock that came from the Enlightenment. Just take us 5 minutes to explain what is scientific materialism.
Sure. I mean, I guess the kind of scientific method, emerged from a Western Christian context. And alchemy, and so Isaac Newton, was both a scientist and an alchemist, and so on. And then as we discovered the extraordinary power of the scientific method, it became less clear why we needed to posit, a theological dimension. And over time, they're just, as you say, the Enlightenment. Kant and Hegel were still had a transcendental philosophy. But by the late 19th century, famously Nietzsche declared God is dead. kind of the Anglo-European world had settled on this paradigm of empiricism and reductive materialism, kind of dismissing this idea of psychic phenomena, the supernatural. And there were a bunch of scientists who I'm fascinated with, even in the late 19th and early 20th century. A lot of them were actually, incredibly, intellectually advanced and academic. They started the Society for Psychic Research with Frederick Myers, and they were studying like mediumship and near-death experience. Myers wrote this incredible opus, The Survival of the Human Personality After Bodily Death. But they made some mistakes. Some of the mediums that they were looking at turned out to be frauds, and somehow they got sort of discredited. It still exists, actually. But by the early 20th century, then you had the logical positivists, you had Wittgenstein, you had Bertrand Russell, and so on. We'd really settled on this cultural model, or this ontology of reductive materialism, which basically argues that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of brain function. There's no possibility of connection, consciousness to consciousness. There's no possibility of the survival of any kind of aspect of ourselves after death. And that's been pretty much entrenched in the academies and the media, like the New York Times, the New Yorker, and so on. And now, that's slowly becoming challenged. I think that, psychedelics help. So many people are having, these types of experiences. Also, a new philosophy that I'm very much inspired by and excited by is sort of, well, it's not really new. I mean, Rudolf Steiner was a monistic idealist back in the 1890s or something. He wrote his first book. But Bernardo Kastrup is one very good kind of spokesperson for this position. He's written a whole series of books that I highly recommend. One is called Why Materialism is Baloney. Another one is called The Idea of the World. So this idea that actually the world is mental in nature, which is also what the quantum physics kind of recognized from their studies. And in fact, the 2022 Nobel Prize for Physics went to experiments that have demonstrated over the last half century that the universe is, quote unquote, not locally real, right? So when there's not an observer making an observation, there isn't really stuff. There's more like energetic patterns, fluctuations, and so on, at least on the subquantum level.
Is when electrons behave as particle or as waves, right? That was from...
Yeah, well, to collapse the wave into a particle requires an observation.
Yeah, it is crazy.
Yeah.
But the 22 Nobel Prize, I thought it was more to do with like entanglement, this idea that when two particles were connected and then they were like divided even like for thousands of miles away, they would automatically change them. They find this idea of speed of light.
I don't know, maybe that's another way of saying it. But if you look it up like Scientific American, the discovery was that the universe is just not locally real. That's how they're simply stating it. But yeah, it's based on those kind of entanglement experiments and demonstrating over and over these things over and over again. But
the skeptic, they say that it happens in such a small scale that it's not relevant.
Sure, but that small quantum scale is already, you wouldn't have a computer or microprocessor. I mean, we're already using the discoveries of quantum physics in all of our, things, and they're all based. So it's like, just because something, you can't say that just because it works on the micro scale, it doesn't have relevance on the macro scale. That doesn't make any sense.
I'm just very surprised that there hasn't been a debate, there hasn't been media about it, nobody knows about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know like Thomas Kuhn wrote that book about the structure of like scientific revolutions. And, once a paradigm is very entrenched, it takes a long time to dislodge it. And, it took centuries to move from, Christianity, theology to, empiricism and materialism. That was seen as a great kind of forward movement of humanity. So to now go back, there's a lot of fear that will lead to like, kind of religious, fervor or cultism or something. So you have a lot of people like Sam Harris or
Christopher Hitchinson.
Yeah, Yuval Noah Harari. They're all kind of protecting the materialist model. In fact, I just went to a talk on Sunday by somebody who's a philosopher in the psychedelic space in Utrecht, and he's come up with a theory called the new materialism. So it's like even it's just constantly kind of re-entrenching these materialist idea because it's a big jump and as Kastrup, and one of his books is called, what's nice about Kastrup is, I wrote about all this stuff in 2012, looking at Steiner and also Amit Goswami, the physicist who wrote The Self-Aware Universe and so on. But what's nice about Kastrup, he just formalizes it to another degree. And he himself was a scientist at CERN, so he has a very rational mind. I don't agree with him on like everything, but if we understand, and basically the monistic or analytic idealist idea is identical to like Tibetan Buddhism or Buddhism in general. This idea that the primordial awareness is the fundamental reality, and everything kind of emerges out of this instinctive consciousness or awareness, and we're just kind of like dream characters in this dream that this consciousness is having. Just as when we dream, we have dream characters in our dream who seem to have, kind of reality in a way. So, but this also allows us to look at the world symbolically and allegorically, because if the whole universe and the physical world is like a dream that consciousness is having, then we can interpret everything that happens as like dream symbols in the dream narrative, as we would as a Freudian or Jungian would interpret a dream. So this actually allows us then to understand reality as symbolic and allegorical, which is the way all of the mystical and esoteric traditions understand it. The Hermeticists, the Western alchemists, the indigenous people with their animism and so on. Like if you visit like an indigenous culture like the Kogi, if a hummingbird comes into your house with like a butterfly in its mouth, they'd be like, oh, that means like your brother is sick, in another town. And, so they have this deep understanding of sort of, how the psyche operates and how symbol structures operate. And so, now, I've been writing recently in the newsletter about how if we combine analytic idealism with Rupert Sheldrake's ideas around morphogenetic fields and morphic resonance, then really things start to make a lot of sense. Because it's confusing. Like, why do these different indigenous societies seem to have these different magical powers that exist in their local framework? But if the universe is consciousness experiencing itself, and if these cultures are existing in thousands of years in like resonance and reciprocity with a local ecosystem, weaving, language, weaving myth, weaving story, weaving ritual, that would ultimately allow, maybe for completely different things to manifest than we can imagine in our logos, in our world of Western materialism and rationalism, where we don't have a place for those things. So I think that actually there's a powerful new paradigm. And in fact, I have a little bit of a think tank called The Elevator, www.theelevator.earth. And we just published our first kind of position paper, which basically argues that this monistic, idealism as a new ontology is so much more coherent than materialism, and actually could be transformative for human civilization, if we're going to survive this ecological destructive situation that we've unleashed, which maybe we've unleashed subconsciously to bring about some kind of transformation. Sorry, I went on for a bit.
No. That's great. I just would like if you could just clarify a little bit these terms for people. Monistic idealism. What's the etymology of the word monistic?
Analytic or monistic. Monistic is monism. I mean, materialism is a monism. Materialism argues that everything is material. Ultimately, monistic idealism argues that consciousness, which is all that we experience, like every experience that we have is an experience through consciousness or of consciousness, perceiving something. If I hit this table, it's consciousness that has that experience. So it actually makes much more just plain sense to understand that consciousness is the foundational layer rather than materiality, which is really just an inference. So
okay. So what do you see as practical example that this theory makes more sense? I mean, there is like, magical episode from these indigenous tribes that you describe that, they can navigate the structure of reality with like a different code. They decode what's happening, like you said, more symbolically. The hummingbird with the butterfly will affect their action in a certain way, which in the West we will not understand that. What else? There is like, this memory of past lives. There is a lot of that. There is a University of Virginia, I think they have a specific center where they have like such a huge statistics about that. This idea of synchronicities that seems to be really almost sometimes impossible to be coincidence. What else do you see in terms of practical example in reality that would confirm this theory?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure there's actually, when you get right down to it, a limit. Like, we don't know what the limit is. I mean, as Kastrup talks about, Yeah, there's a lot of, like, or let's say the morphogenetic fields for things are very strong. So for instance, like Sheldrake would talk about like crystal formation, right? Like, one of Sheldrake's big ideas is that there are not really fixed laws in nature. That when we thought there were fixed laws, we were basically taking this human idea of laws and legal structures, and we were kind of turning it over to nature, but that was basically based on our, courts. And, we thought of God as like the Supreme Court, and the angels, having this court of angels in heaven, and these fixed immutable laws that are eternal. But actually it's much more sensible to understand that they're not laws of nature. They're more like patterns or principles that become more coherent over time. So they seem like immutable laws. So for instance, if you have a few molecules in a certain configuration and like a crystal forms, that creates a new pattern for crystal formation. So whenever molecules come into that organization, they're quite likely to form a crystal. That becomes so regulated that it feels like a law. And Sheldrake has gotten into this in depth. But that's not only true in terms of purely material things, but also in terms of cultural things. Like he's done studies on solving crossword puzzles. How at first crossword puzzle may be extremely difficult, but then like one person gets it, then 10 people get it, and suddenly 1 million people get it. Suddenly.
Or SAT for students.
Yeah, exactly. So all around the world we have, often anecdotal, but sometimes kind of other forms of evidence for paranormal and psychic phenomena. Whether it's the masters of ki in the East who can throw people across the room with their chi, or the rainbow body in Tibetan Buddhism, where when highly developed monks die, they can actually either just maintain their body in a non-decayed condition for months because they have this sort of subtle consciousness layer, or their body actually dissolves and all that's left are hair and fingernails, and often there's like manifestations of rainbows. I think this is probably true, to be honest. And another example from the Sequoia, who are this indigenous community I visited in the Amazon, they said that earlier when their culture was still more intact, when they worked with ayahuasca and worked with the spirits that they knew, and their whole language was based on bird songs and these spirits and so on, they would let's say somebody in the tribe was sick with an illness that they didn't have a cure for, they would pray and sing all night for something to help that person. And at the end of the night, the head shaman would look down at his hand, and there would be like a seed, and they would plant the seed, and it would be like a new plant they'd never seen before that could actually like treat that condition. So for reasons that are complicated to explain, perhaps, I completely think that they're just telling the truth, and the way they said it was really straightforward. And also, like, even in Ibiza, I met this Tibetan Lama who was talking about I talked to him about lucid dreaming and reincarnation, and he talked about his father. His father was also a big Lama. His father had passed away, and he said that he went. After his father died, he in deep meditation, he visited his father in the sort of nirvana, and his dad was like, "I'm done. I'm not coming back. That's it. I can't do it anymore." And his son was like, "No, Dad, you got to come back. I need you right now. Like, things are really difficult." And then he looked at me and he was like, "Yeah, now my father is a 10-year-old boy in Bhutan, and I think that he just knew that they have a very evolved science of reincarnation. And this is like Rudolf Steiner, who's one of my central figures. He said that the mission of his life on Earth, I think he lived from like 1865 to 1925, was to bring the knowledge of reincarnation back to the West, that we'd lost it with the transition to Christianity. And he actually wrote a whole series of books called Karmic Relationships, where he, from his readings of the Akashic Records, could trace different Western individualities back through history. So he could show you who Goethe was in like the Middle Ages or in the Roman times or whatever. I don't know if it's literally true in the way
we see truth.
Yeah, exactly. But it's fascinating.
Yeah. But so forgive me, just for people that are a little bit less comfortable with this theory and concept. One way I understood the morphogenetic field is that this idea of like memory cosmic bank. It's like what is happening, what's ever happened is sort of like stored somewhere, like the Akashic records. So I remember Rupert Sheldrake was saying that when you have this, when you repeat the same ritual for thousands of years, you create like a field.
Yeah.
That then you can. But so how can you connect this morphogenetic field theory with the monistic idealism?
I mean, it just seems very natural to me. I mean, it would be like if the universe is consciousness experiencing itself, that makes a lot of sense that these patterns would become more coherent within consciousness. So they seem like permanent structures, but actually they're just patterns that have become very coherent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of a trend, I don't know about in New York, but, in Ibiza, in the New Age community, about, just relaxing your nervous system. There's the work of Stephen Borges about the autonomous nervous system, the polyvagal theory, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So now, there's a lot of talk. I went to a conference in Ibiza, like 100% of the speakers mentioned this polyvagal nerve that connect with the brain and the lungs and the throat and the ears. But so, what I wanted to ask you is that how do we, if we embrace this idea that consciousness is primordial, is it possible that we humans learn to navigate this consciousness field in a more harmonious way by calming our nervous system, surrender? In Tao they call it Wu Wei. Have you heard about Wu Wei? It's like the art of not forcing. And I hear a lot people using this idea of being engaged but not forcing, not being attached to the outcome. Is it possible that with this new theory that you just described, we have a different relationship with reality? Because what we have been taught in the scientific materialism is that we have to work very, very hard to change the structure of reality. And, there is this like rush mentality or scarcity mentality. And this create like an epidemic in this planet of people not being able to make meets end and being a little bit crushed by reality. Okay, if what I'm trying to ask you is that, how do we use this change of paradigm for us to live a better life?
Yeah, it's good you asked me that. I mean, so I have to be honest and say that I struggle a lot with this whole like Ibiza reality. Whereas it seems to me that a lot of people I know who are, highly intelligent, highly skilled, and also have a lot of capital resources have sort of sequestered themselves in a way on this island. And it makes me sad because I feel like I'm living on 7th Street and Avenue B. On my corner, I'm seeing these African guys line up every day because, they can't live in their countries anymore. And
because of environmental disaster.
Yeah, but a lot of that environmental disaster is actually our fault. Like I don't see, for me, like a true spirituality at this point in time, only begins not when you're trying to always relax your nervous system or feel better about yourself or doing anything with yourself, but really trying to address these systemic...
Helping others.
Yeah, but I mean, not just helping the others who look like you and, are well-dressed and have like fancy clothes and all that kind of stuff. That's not spirituality from my perspective. So like, so like these guys, like a lot of them came from the Ivory Coast, so then I did some research, like why are they coming from the Ivory Coast? And some of them, like they fly to like Brazil or like Peru, then they march. Like some of them walk for a year, without any food, just starving almost. They have to come to the Mexican border. They then, find a way to get across. Then the governor of Texas has been busing them here because we have an asylum law, and also they want to give it to the Western and to the Eastern liberal establishment or whatever. But so what's happening in the Ivory Coast? 50% of the world's chocolate is grown there. Right? Do you like chocolate?
Yeah.
I love chocolate. I mean, I learned about this while I was eating a chocolate croissant at my local cafe. That cost me $12, to buy this coffee and croissant. So, Nestle's and Hershey's, which are, American companies that, a lot of stock portfolios have shares in that, so on. They're responsible for, growing all this cacao. And they've made a lot of corrupt deals with the government there. And 80% deforestation now. Guess how much the average worker in the cacao farm makes per day?
$5.
78 cents, So, we're eating these delicious chocolate bonbons and, flying to Switzerland and having all these experiences. These people are traumatized and living in hell. And then you add on to that, climate change, global warming, onto the deforestation and the sort of domination of Western companies that have allowed us to lead these very privileged, lifestyles of health and wellness and spirituality, quote unquote. So I just, for me, it's like, it's painful. Like I would love to see, people like all you guys in Ibiza kind of like shift from this constant focus on self and like, how do I get better or look better or be healthier? It's like, it feels just kind of like unfair to me, because we're really like, our benefits have come from this like destruction of the world, like that we've sort of allowed to happen on our watch, So unless we're not really trying to wrestle with that, we're not really being spiritual. We're just kidding ourselves. It's like, can we really? I mean, now it's like really, and I started, warning everybody about this back in 2002, and kind of destroyed myself and my career in a weird way by insisting on this as a focus. But now it's like really severe. I mean, like if you read what's happening with agriculture, like in Europe, right? Like huge deluges in Northern Europe and England, a lot of these places are not going to be able to produce food anymore. Like James Lovelock.
The land is too corrupted and from the monoculture.
Well, it's also the climate change and the unpredictable effects. Like plants need reliability, or they don't. So like James Lovelock, who's the founder of the Gaia hypothesis, like super respected scientist in England, he's saying that by 2040 to 2050, there will be no agriculture possible in Europe, So where are we going to get our food from? Like, I mean, I don't understand why people aren't freaking out about this, like organizing around it, like, and I know you're doing permaculture, which is great, but this is like systemic. Like we can't let millions and millions of people just perish, because of this insanity,
Yeah. Anyhow, I feel drawn a little bit to specify that, of course, in the new spiritual scene, there's a lot of privilege and maybe self-centeredness. But, from what I see in Ibiza and in other places is this attempt to create community and to mirror each other on the community level, which I find that it's very helpful for growth and for helping others.
Yeah, for personal growth.
But the growth of the community, like for having conscious parenting, conscious decoupling. I mean, in Ibiza, in New York, people break up and there's like lawyers and...
How about conscious systems change?
Me and you, we always a little bit like not completely agree on that. But can we try to connect this new paradigm, the morphogenetic, the monistic idealism, into the environmental crisis? Do you see a way to use this new paradigm change to solve the environmental crisis?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, in a weird way, I'm much more peaceful and happier than I've ever been.
Yeah, you look good.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to the gym also.
Yeah.
Partially because I've just like surrendered. I have reached this kind of woo way, like non-attachment, like go with the flow. But I mean, so if I look at it, rationally, it seems most likely that humanity is like here today, gone tomorrow, pretty much. I mean, it's like if you combine the, microplastics, the ecological devastation, the disappearance of the insects, with, sociopaths and psychopaths like Putin, with millions of, nuclear weapons poised at everybody, and then you have, these kind of like, even like Sam Altman, who I liked at first, he looks more and more like creepy to me, and all of his like ethics people just left OpenAI, like, with all these concerns about, how OpenAI could allow for, like, for instance, infinitely stable dictatorships, so, just, we already see that in China, these sort of technocratic control systems that are very difficult to escape. So, I feel, there's a high probability that we don't make it. I mean, but on the other hand, I get very inspired by Christopher Bosch, LSD in the Mind of the Universe, and this kind of vision that he had over and over again that, things were going to get very bad. And, I think we're a few years away from that. Like we're not going to be playing games anymore. We're going to be like, how do I get enough like lima beans to eat? I mean, not everybody, but it's going to become more and more, problem.
Around the equator when it's hotter.
I think even in a lot of Europe, I mean, England, even in America now, do you know how many people suffer from kind of food scarcity? It's like 1 in 4 people in the US suffer from some degree of food scarcity. This is supposed to be the richest country in the world. That's how...
Because this food is not nutritious.
Well, it's not just that. It's also because capital has extracted all the wealth to the top of the pyramid. You have like, it's unbelievable. You have like a small group of people have taken all the wealth, and in a system where you have to buy everything, through money. I mean, I think Zuckerberg has more wealth than like 27% of the other millennials. All of the other millennials put together. This system. I mean, that's why I believe that we need to break capitalism in some way, which is even more difficult now that we've had this multipolar world and we have like Putin, off the charts in terms of his, desire to wreak vengeance against the West. And, anyways, a lot of things are happening. But okay, so, yes, there is, I think, this alternative line, but we're not taking it seriously enough. I mean, Dean Radin talked about
the number generator.
Well, Dean Radin was the chief scientist at Institute of Noetic Sciences. He's a very cool guy. But one of his points that he made over and over again, which I love, which we had in the 2012 film, is that we might be at a point with psychic energy, where we were with electricity back in the late 19th century.
When Franklin was playing.
Yeah, Franklin got zapped, and then they were like, okay, this is an amazing power. But then it took like generations of experiments to like channel it, to transmit it. And once we figured out how to do that with electricity, we were able to transform the whole like geophysical nature of our world in 50, 100 years. It's like incredibly fast. Like once we get something, we can move fast. So if there's some way that psi or psychic energy is available as a transformational force, if we could figure it out and anchor it, maybe that becomes like part of this new morphogenetic field effect. Maybe that is something that could work. I don't know exactly how. Even if we go extinct physically, we might also be entering some other dimension. I mean, like Rudolf Steiner talked about that. Like he talked about different incarnations of the Earth, and that we were approaching the fifth incarnation of the Earth. And he also foresaw kind of like different spiritual kind of things that were going to happen. Like he talked about the incarnation of this being that he called Ahriman, which represented kind of rationality, the sterility, minerality, materiality. So it could be that AI developing a body, developing autonomy, is this Ahrimanic incarnation that Steiner warned about, that he believed was going to happen. We couldn't really prevent it, but what made a difference was how many people understood it in this occult or spiritual way. So I think that's interesting. Anyway, yeah. So I think there's some potential there that we should certainly harness, and we should like work a lot faster and with a lot more coordination to get there. Now that we've begun to have the idea. And I'm talking to a friend, Miguel, who is interested in building like a consciousness research center in Portugal. I mean, Ibiza, this could be a great use for Ibiza. Like, could you construct centers where people are going through like dark retreats, extended state DMT, like moving towards this new paradigm, interacting with it, developing new language and mythology around it, so that all really interests me.
Yeah. But, since I know you for many years now,
yeah,
I feel you have a little bit this like, duality in your thinking. You have on one side, you have your curiosity for the new paradigm, consciousness being primordial, this new psychic energy that we can learn to now harness for supernatural power. And then there's your activist identity, which is what the fuck are we doing? We're like we're so greedy, our consumerism, that we don't see that we are depleting the planet of resources with this extraction mentality. We are like, the Bangladesh and the Maldives and the people that there's already a major environmental migration. But then when we look at, for example, the psychedelic movement, that, yes, it's mostly medical, but I see now more and more research about psychedelic for a change of ontology, for understanding this new ontology of this animist ontology, like, and it's happening. We have so many in some of this. It's not super public because this compound is still illegal in most countries. But there is friends of ours that are opening center in San Jorge, in Chapada de Varaderos. They're doing like a institute of research around indigenous shamanism. There is Matteo with the Shipibo, he's like rewriting the constitution of the Shipibo, and they are trying to open a center to use the Shipibo cosmovision and ontology to help children education. There is like a retreat in the community starting in Turkey, in Bali. I mean, you saw it first, right? You were saying there is a tipping point in consciousness is happening, but you don't seem to be satisfied.
No, I'm not satisfied. No, I mean, definitely not Are you satisfied? I mean, it's like one thing that slightly concerns me in a way is like, I feel like the kind of elite sector who've now, powered up on psychedelics and understand the value of these things are, in a way making an alliance with these, precious indigenous cultures, which converge on a new form of
exploitation.
Well, neocolonialism in a way, but it's also kind of like, what about everybody else? And, I guess sometimes I feel that I love humanity in the abstract, but not necessarily so much in the particular. Like when you go to the airport and suddenly you're like, who are all these terrible people? Do I even really care about what happens to them? The kids with their like video game consoles and all that stuff. But I think we should still we don't want to see, this catastrophic endpoint for.
But do you agree with me that we were teenager in the 80s, right? And who was your model back then? I don't know. You were probably the son of artist and writer and painter. But, in my environment in the 80s, it was all about Gordon Gekko and Oliver Stone. If you want a friend, buy a dog. And it was this idea of capitalism and wealth.
Yeah. Oh, I guess actually my archetypes in those days were artists like Ginsberg, who I knew a little bit, but people like David Byrne or Laurie Anderson or Lou Reed. Those are the people that I really looked up to. Come to think of it, now that I think about it in retrospect, Godard, even Woody Allen back then.
Yeah. Your mother was a writer, your father was a painter, but most of the people, there was this the yuppies was the prevalent culture, right? The young urban professional making money. Now look at our kids. They don't want to they want to help the planet. Look at Lily and Stefano. They're graduating. They want to help either the art or they don't have. I feel there's been a change in consciousness in the new generation in terms of wanting to help people.
Yeah, I live in this neighborhood, so I'm constantly surrounded by 25 to 33-year-olds or whatever, 22-year-old. I think a lot of people are just they're just trying to people. Well, first of all, people are very confused right now, and a lot of people have a very negative feeling about it. If you scratch the surface, people feel that we're headed for doom. Yeah, it's it's pretty intense. I don't know. It feels like in a weird way, one of the I'm always a part of me is like Lenin or something, like Stalin or Trotsky or something. I'm thinking about how do you create a revolutionary movement. Because I tried to do that with Evolver, and if we'd had a little bit more runway, and we might have gotten somewhere. But what we're seeing right now with AI, it's a little bit of an overreach in terms of the amount of kind of talented and skilled and resourced people who are just being made obsolete or laid off. That could be the basis for a new kind of class, or the cognitariat. My friend Warren calls them. People who might have a little bit of latitude to kind of think about the system and then apply their talents to changing it in some way.
For pro-social behavior.
Yeah. The problem we have is the underlying structure of the financial system, which kind of holds the whole thing together. I've always been interested in I've talked about corporations as being actually kind of like the nascent organs of the human body, like oil companies are kind of like the blood, circulation system. And then you have media is like the what are these sensory apparatus, turning it into kind of memes that then the whole system reacts upon. And then the financial system is like the nervous system of the collective human organism. And that's maybe the hardest to change because, everything we have to have this constant growth because of debt. Everybody has to keep fulfilling the past obligations and so on. And, if you look at the chart of money creation in the US since 2008, it's like a hockey stick. It's gone up, so much. How could that be
sustainable?
Yeah, it just seems like when that kind of thing happens, ultimately you're headed for some massive meltdown,
So on a good day, when you're optimistic, where your optimism comes from?
I'm not really, I'm not really, am I optimistic? I don't really like those terms anymore, pessimistic, optimistic. I'm joyful. I love life. If I get, creamed tomorrow, it was still amazing. This was quite a ride. If everybody, if the whole thing goes down in flames, that's just what had to happen. That's the evolutionary trajectory. What's that?
You're a little bit like fatalist.
Not even fatalist. I'm curious, but I think sometimes we get, I don't like the word hope. I feel like Obama really kind of contaminated that word anyway. But, I think we need to get beyond kind of some of these dualisms. It's amazing what's happening. I'm so grateful to be alive right now, to know the people that I know, to see these contradictions, to have my own little archetypal role in this evolutionary process,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And you have and I see your following increasing. People resonate with your ideas. You have like 200 people at your recent online workshop. I mean, your ideas are getting more popular.
I don't know about that. I mean, I feel kind of like surprisingly kind of left out of a lot of discourses. It's interesting. So I think there's something about me. I've never played like politics, like cultural politics. I'm kind of a curmudgeon. I'm kind of a weirdo. I don't know. It's like I feel a little bit. But there's something good about that too, in a weird way. Like always being the outsider.
Because you're navigating these two world, right? The environmental activism, but then also the more esoteric new ontology.
I don't know. I mean,
do you know anybody else like that? I mean, I feel that you have the Castro, the philosopher of mind, the academic that study that, but that they're not environmental activists. I think you have.
Well, I mean, I've had the fun of kind of just giving myself, because I was really impressed with Buckminster Fuller and his idea is that we have too many specialists, that hyper specialization is part of our social problem. So like, somebody who's an economist or a day trader or whatever, or like a biologist studying like what happens on like one side, strand of one gene or something, but not really thinking holistically. So, Buckminster Fuller's idea is that we needed more comprehensive generalists. And I'd already written like a book or two when I read that. I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to like set out to do. So, I keep expanding, maybe I don't go as deep as some people like, I mean, recently I'm like rereading some of Deleuze and Guattari, like, 1,000 Plateaus and the rhizome and like, just like synthesize. I feel like, yeah, like almost like a DJ who can synthesize, I'm still very interested in sexuality and gender, which we've also discussed, kind of like, I'm interested in it anthropologically because like there's so much change happening between men and women right now. And then you have this sort of, other genders and the trans situation and so on. And then there's, identity politics on the left seems kind of like a dead end, but it's really hard to figure out how you reunite people to accept, when they don't agree with other people and just like, but still, be with them and love them and work with them, so yeah, I mean, it's cool. I haven't given myself any limits. I mean, I wish I had, 3 brains instead of just one.
But let's discuss a little bit your what's your take on current state of sexuality?
Well, a lot is happening. I guess it depends on which generation. I mean, in a way, like I'm looking more like, thinking more about the 20s, 30s, but, there's a big kind of retraction back into more conservative ideas. There's a book called Against the Sexual Revolution.
Like Louis Perry.
Yeah. And it's an interesting, interesting book. I don't think it quite, works because, I'm also very much inspired by, Osho and, kind of polyamorous neo-tantra and Tamara, Dieter Doom's book, Eros Unredeemed, that was like, where I got into trouble was I had this like almost like ideological idea that sexual, emancipation was the road forward.
It was the road forward and also the responsibility of the community.
Yeah, well, that's
like very politicized, right. Like in Tamara.
Tamara, that I think I didn't, have that in my own life, but I think that's an interesting point. They believe that you can only have that in a community that's holding it. But also, frankly, I don't know how great it's going for them. Like, I think the older women are not like super happy there. I noticed that when you go there, everybody's like chain smoking. I want to go back. But, and if you're smoking so much, it means there's like repressed energy or anger or grief or something, so yeah, but I try to observe, the sort of totality of a system, I guess. Yeah, I mean, so like, women have increased their power in society. They're becoming much better educated than men. Women are becoming, more liberal and progressive. Men are becoming more right-wing and reactionary. And there's like the incel movement and men moving into their like basements and playing video games. And, but then, it's just like we could do a whole nother discussion around that. But there's so many layers to it.
What I heard, one of these ISTA teacher from this Institute of Temple Art Mystery School, he says that like in relationship preference, you have all these different way to interact, like poly, open, swinging, don't ask, don't tell. But the umbrella term is non-monogamy. and then you have all these different way. And they told me that, in Tantra, Neo-Tantra, sexual liberation, the Kashmir massage, the Kashmir approach, the lingam, the armoring, the umbrella term would be spiritual embodiment. And that stayed with me because, like the word sexuality and eros always loaded. But, I've been to some of this retreat where the objective is really embody spirituality. It's the idea of using your body, interacting with other people, not necessarily for pleasure, but for transcendence. And that happened in this ISTA course. There is like this opening of like energetic portals. Even
it's just as powerful as like an ayahuasca.
It's so powerful,
yeah, so
and
powerful,
and they call it transpersonal. So when I had the opportunity to interact with a man, and I'm not bisexual, and I'm actually a little bit like
gotta make that claim pretty quick, get that out there.
But anyhow, I don't want to disclose
you
too much.
You might be wearing a dress 5 years from now, you never know.
That's what my friends from Rome says. But anyhow, there was like this exercise, this interaction. It was one of the most beautiful moments of my life. He was crying, we were crying, but not because of me, because this care and attention and gratitude was triggering, archetypal energy of healing and wholeness. And when you have that on the as a group with the right music, where everybody's regulating the autonomous nervous system through vulnerability, and so, maybe it's not always like that, but if you're surrounded by people in the vulnerable state, you feel safe. You don't feel threatened by people that are processing vulnerability, vulnerable stuff. So I find that, I feel for this spiritual embodiment movement the same enthusiasm I had 20 years ago for ayahuasca. Because I see to what extent sexuality is everywhere, but everybody's misusing it. Because man has been, because in so many environments, sex is still something men take and women give. And in this dynamics, there is, there's a protocol of question to regulate the way you interact, which prevent from being hurt. There is like BD or something. You share your desire, your boundary, your aftercare, your pre-care. Some people say, okay, it takes a little bit the magic away of this, like, seems very clinical, but then it avoids a lot of pain of people having different intention, different expectation. And I'm a big fan of ISTA. You were the one who was telling me.
I'm going to level 2 in July.
Yeah,
finally.
Where?
Turkey.
I'm going I'm doing in June, level 2 in June, with Bruce Lyon.
Bruce Lyon is in where are you doing that?
In England.
Oh, cool.
Outside London.
Yeah, it just feels like it's an interesting, post, Me Too, and sort of we're still in cancellation culture, but it's sort of abating. And I feel like men and women don't quite know what to do with each other. Yeah, it's very interesting.
I feel that maybe the spiritual embodiment folks, it's more about spirituality and transcendence and out-of-body experience and connect with the divine. And I'm generalizing, I'm just brainstorming, but maybe the non-monogamy is more about freedom and self-realization and independence, and I don't see much overlapping.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really been tracking. I don't know. Not many of my friends are doing the sort of ethical non-monogamy right now, they're like, either they're single or they're partnered. I think people partially don't have the time for it. It's like unless you live in a place. In Tamara, it's like what they do instead of like going to the movies or television. It's like they have these like endless processing.
Yeah, the forum.
Otherwise, it's just it's often going to just lead to polyagony.
But so this morning I found you in a particularly good mood, and you share that you're feeling like excited, enthusiastic, and inspired about what?
I am seeing that I can make more use of the creative tools. It's just a very good time to be a creative entrepreneur. I can, like
with AI.
Yeah, I can create a course, do all the imaging, all the marketing. I don't need anybody else. Sometimes I get people to help me just for save time, and I can live, decently off of even, better and better off of that, plus my newsletter. And now I see other pieces that I can bring in. Like now it's like I'm having people, like somebody just, wants me to start a new magazine with them. And I'm like, do I even have like the time? Like, unless they're really paying me well, I just think it's like, I'm better off just building my own ship right now. And I made a mistake in the past with like, wanting to collaborate and so on. Like every time I do that, it actually feels like a step back. Whereas I think for a year or two, I really should just focus on building my own ship.
Network.
And so what's that?
Building your own network.
Well, and also kind of, because I feel like, some of the ideas in Breaking Open the Head in 2012, were now a while back. And so, for instance, I could, create like a YouTube documentary, like Zeitgeist style, to try to like explain to the new generation, why these ideas are important and even kind of advance them, in terms of that, I think, we are in this prophetic time. And if you understand the sort of, Castrupian, Jungian kind of archetypal dimension of the situation, how myth and allegory structure reality, it could really be profoundly helpful. It gives people a whole reframing of what's happening on the planet. And yeah, I mean, it does provide like a very different type of hope. I mean, if we were able to, as we've been discussing, somehow make use of the psychic field. I mean, and also kind of, have other kind of breakthroughs. I mean, I still think that, Rebecca Solnit wrote that book, A Paradise Built in Hell. I mean, as the scale of the emergency, dawns on people, that also will create a lot of freedom, because people will really feel that they want to live for the now, whether that's eroticism or mysticism or just creativity. Could be a great time.
Instead of producing and consuming.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's feeling kind of like old hat.
Yeah, because I can't remember in which podcast someone asked Bernardo Castro, but so how do you integrate all these ideas of monistic idealism in your life? And then he says, I don't plan anything. He says he wakes up in the morning and he's really going with the flow. He says sometimes, he's writing a new book, but sometimes he doesn't write for 2 months. He says he does his breakfast and then he just follow whatever sign.
Yeah.
But so if enough people lives in this radical in the present moment without planning, so how is that going to affect the world at large? There's going to be maybe, a bit like less production.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not averse against planning. I mean, it's just what are you planning for? So, but yeah, I mean,
how can we use the psychic field? How can we navigate? I mean,
yeah, well, I mean, I think, one of the problems I'm having with the way the whole psychedelic renaissance has advanced is, if you look at these indigenous societies, it's not like you just like take the psychedelic and you're healed. It's actually like you go through an initiation, and a very important part of the initiation is you have to speak your visions to the elders, and the elders, kind of like give you context, for what those mean. And sometimes they even like change the society because of the visions that people have. So
that's how they're using the psychic field.
Yeah. Yeah. So we should be doing something like that. We need to figure out what the context is. For me, it also, everything is political just as much as it's spiritual. So, at the moment, I think what happens is people go through these profound, psychedelic journeys. There's like some, personal healing, but then the ego, which is incredibly supple, manages to kind of like figure out how to game the energy of that experience. And then the more you do it, the less transformative it is. The more your ego is figured out a structure. Then finally, like, people are doing it and, they're having, quote unquote, these amazing experiences, but it's not really leading to much. That's kind of why I stopped, for the time being,
Yeah. I mean, the way we are using the psychedelic experience now, my wife and I, is this idea of like developing trust.
Yeah.
And, because we are both come from a history of addiction and anxiety and fear, fear for the future, we both had physically like panic attack. And so this idea is that, when you navigate in this realm, you feel like, it's a bit of a cliche, but they say, the universe has your back. This idea that, life happens for you and not to you. And this is something that, it's something that you the brain is plastic. There is neuroplasticity, but you have to put the effort. So we every day we work on this idea of like surrender, and even if they're catastrophic, what was that book from a Singer on radical acceptance? He went to jail. There was like a big lawsuit. I'm sure if I'll put it on the show notes. And this idea that everything's gonna be okay when you're gonna be okay with everything, and this is something that you learn, and the psychedelic experience helps.
I mean, your parents are old, or have you passed away? Or are they still?
No, but they're like,
yeah. My mom's like 88, and when you like see that that's just where it goes, like ultimately you either are one of the ones who dies earlier, or you kind of like hang on and you watch your whole world kind of like crumble away. I mean, that's so hardcore, like, I mean, we're in our 50s now, but we're not like, a million years away from that phase of life. So, that's like an ultimate, I mean, yeah, to be alive at 88 and deal with all the health stuff. It's like running like a marathon. I mean, I'm also, like you, interested in longevity, because I do feel that life's a little too short. Like now I feel like I kind of know what I'm doing. Like when I was trying to build my stuff in the past, like Evolver, I had a lot of my shadow material I hadn't even looked at, or I didn't even know how to address it. I just felt this urgency and so on. Now I'm like, much more chill and feel much more in a state of like self-mastery, but it's also hard to justify, like, let's say we could figure out how to extend our lives for another 50 years, is that even like fair? Is there something kind of like diabolical about that? When we're kind of like vampirically feeding on, all these corpses of, the plants of the past through fossil fuels, and all these people who don't get those, those type of breaks.
Yeah, there's in America, there's that guy, I think Brian Johnson, something like that, who sold his company for 100 million, 200 million.
Yeah, he seems like kind of a sad case though.
His idea was to regress his biological age to 18 years old.
Yeah.
And he did that.
Did he?
Yeah. And he says that number one is the quality of your sleep. So apparently with the Oura Ring, he had like 6 months of consecutive 100%. And that depends mostly by what time you eat. He stops eating 10 hours before going to bed.
Okay.
And then, I mean, he's got like a team of 20 doctors, every doctor for an organ. And I just go through a divorce.
Yeah, maybe he'll start going out with some hedonistic lady who's like, come on, let's drink martinis. But once again, that's to me is another example of this kind of like, and I think it tends to happen, when you have a lot of, material resources or wealth. It's like the self-focus kicks in. Yeah, where it's like, I just would, like to see more of those resources go to those, yeah, I mean, I don't even like need, but like, yeah, I don't know. It's painful. It's painful just to see the inequities, It doesn't feel right, particularly if we're all the same consciousness, just, like we're going to be them next time around if we don't take care of it, So, that's not going to be fun.
Anyway, we passed the hour. Thank you, Daniel. It's always a pleasure and inspiring to chat with you. Is there anything else on your mind that you want to share, or any,
Sure, just, merciless self-aggrandizement. Like people should subscribe to my Substack, Daniel Pinchbeck at substack.com. They should take my courses, liminal.news. They should read my books, which are awesome. And
are you going to do a writing course again?
Yeah, I'll do a writing course again.
Yeah, I want to do that. I want to.
Oh, cool. It'd be fun to have you.
I want to sign up.
It's been great. Those have been great. And I've seen people get a lot better. What I've seen is like, yes, I had some friends who joined and their writing was kind of wobbly. And then they got really good. And I was like, wow, they could actually like do it now.
Yeah.
Then they kind of lost focus again. So I think a lot of people can do it, particularly if like people have had like a lot of, profound life experience. They can all write a book, but it's a marathon. It's like, it requires like a lot of self-discipline and kind of like, you have to just be willing to like sit there. It's boring in a way.
But AI can help you, right? I mean, not writing for you, but you will write 50 pages and then you can you upload on AI and you can say, can you expand part in your style? That wouldn't be like tricky.
It so far it has a kind of generic quality when it takes off on the writing, but it's incredibly useful for research, and for maybe organizing, for doing things like marketing copy. I mean, but it's also a little bit frightening because the universe is just getting flooded with crap. And the internet is becoming like a giant flood of like AI generated content and AI generated books. I mean, this one guy talks about how like he went on Amazon, he'd written a book about consciousness actually. There were like all these like manuals on like about his book or workbooks that people had just generated with AI in like 20 minutes and just tried to sell. So it's really, it's kind of a mess right now. But yeah, I think there are some useful uses for it. But I think that like, you know, still with art, with creativity, we're going to want to, you know, make sure that we're in touch with like a human soul, you know, when we read or listen or watch something. So as soon as the AI you kind of feel it, there's like an intuition, like you feel this sort of metallic twang to it, you know. So I don't think we can outsource much writing to it in that sense.
Yeah. I just finished this book. You know, Elizabeth Gilbert. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and this last book is a little book you can listen in 4 hours, and it's called Big Magic. She makes this theory that ideas, they're like independent sentient beings. They're like supernatural beings that come to you when they feel you deserve it, when you feel you are in integrity and you're going to give the right attention to this idea. And then if you get distracted and if you don't follow up, then the idea leaves. Is it interesting? And I
agree with that.
Yeah. And so I felt inspired because she said, listen, you know, we are all creative. We come from million years of creativity. It's only in the last few hundred years that some people are purely consumer and you know, like with TV and you know, we have in our genes she call it the creative lifestyle. So this idea of creative living, which is not something that, you know, you want to sell necessarily, of course, but this idea of just create.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, one way I'm experimenting with AI also is I'm doing these videos, and now you can get an instant transcription, and then I can, you know, edit those transcriptions, and you know, I think that sometimes my writing may be a little too intellectually intricate for, you know, some readers.
Yeah.
But when I speak, it's not like that. So, you know, if I take a transcript and then edit it, maybe that's a median, you know, between my normal writing tone and something that actually more people can just access. So I'm experimenting with that too.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, good hangout.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'll come back in 6 months.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Koka sunarai sunarayenti. 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 Koka sunarai sunarayenti.